Thank you, Count Kohler. Just before I start, may I just take the opportunity to extend my own and my party's sympathies to the family of the late great Jim Stynes, who passed away after a long illness on Tuesday. He was a true sportsman and used his other skills to help others, particularly children and young people who were disadvantaged. A proud Dublin man, an Irishman, who became an Australian national hero. Ayashte Gureva Anam Deelish. Taoiseach, since the government announced the introduction of the €100 household charge, it has been mishandled in a ham-fisted manner. It smacks of arrogance, carelessness, and, to be frank, incompetence. Even though the announcement was made last July, the majority of households across the country have yet to receive information leaflets, and there are only 10 more days to the deadline. There has been no proactive campaign. Not everyone has access to the web for information on how to pay or know what choices are available to them. For example, as you know, there is total confusion about people being allowed to make payments at the post office. The Postmasters Union have been commenting on this for weeks, and I think the General Secretary of that union summed it up when he said that basically Minister Hogan, he says, seems to be going out of his way to make it difficult for people who want to do so to pay with ease. And the only response from Minister Hogan is a pronouncement from on high that there will be no extension to the deadline. And that is despite the fact that up to 11 a.m. this morning, his department has said that only 280,000 have registered out of 1.8 million households who are obliged to register. There's intense anger growing across the country about the manner in which this charge has been handled. The government's attitude, Taoiseach, is practically Orwellian. Big Phil is going to get you, seems to be the mantra. No matter what, whether it's through utility charges or through paychecks, there's nowhere to run, nowhere to hide. Big Phil is watching you, he will make you pay. That seems to be the mantra emanating from the government. And I'm sure you will agree, Taoiseach, that that approach is simply not working. It's no way to treat the vast majority of reasonable, responsible people who are law-abiding and reasonable and want to obey the law. And remember, before the election, the Labour Party wanted exemptions, those in negative equity, those who paid stamp duty and so on. Yet when Fianna Fáil brought forward amendments to the legislation in this House, you voted against those. So did the Labour Party, despite also calling for such exemptions themselves. We had further amendments on welfare dependents and medical cards, which were also voted down by Fine Gael and Labour. The basic question, you might clarify, Taoiseach, whether you can pay via the post office or not, because I think Sean O'Rourke had to clarify that on the News at 1 after interviewing you. I think you may have inadvertently made a mistake by saying you could, and he said, lest anyone else be further misled. Thank you. The Taoiseach may have made a mistake. You cannot pay, he said, via the post office. And will you now agree to an extension? Will you agree to an extension of the deadline beyond March 31st, so that people will be given a reasonable opportunity to pay, and a payment can be facilitated in much easier ways? I think an extension would allow greater information to be put out and would outline the choices for payment, and indeed would facilitate easier ways of paying.
Thank you.
First of all, I want to join with Deputy Martin in expressing sympathy on the death of Jim Stynes, great sportsman, great ambassador for this country in Australia. And just to say that I'm arranging through our ambassador in Australia for the state to be represented at the funeral, as I'm sure Deputy Barton would expect. I do acknowledge that there have been difficulties with the payment of the household charge, and I do acknowledge that there has been difficulties in relation to the communication of the household charge to households. I think to some extent that is understandable enough in a situation where this is a new charge and the method of payment is a new method of payment. The position is that the legislation which was introduced and the arrangements which were put in place by the Minister for the Environment provide for a deadline of the 31st of March by which the charge is to be paid. No change has been made in that deadline. I spoke with the Minister for the Environment about it earlier today, and no change is planned to that deadline. It is possible to make the payment at the post office. I understand that arrangements have been made for the forms and so on to be in place in post offices, and that people can make the payment at the post office, and that's in addition to the arrangement which is in place for paying it online. And I acknowledge that not everybody is in a position to do that or to pay it by post.
Thank you.
Taoiseach, could I put it to you that perhaps one of the reasons why there's a difficulty with this charge is, of course, that your own party and the Fine Gael party made cast iron guarantees and promises to people that such a charge would not be introduced. In fact, Minister Burton said at the time that a flat charge is the unfairest possible way of all to introduce a property tax, is what Minister John Burton then said. And that basically, when you say one thing before an election, you go into government and do the exact opposite. That does annoy people. You may smile, but that is a factor. I was out and about last week. That is the common view, by the way. Now, it does create difficulties for you when you do a 180-degree U-turn and then try and introduce something against which you recklessly railed a short while ago. That's one factor. But you said you spoke to the Minister. Well, I would be interested really in ascertaining what was the nature of that conversation with Minister Hogan. Are you suggesting to Minister Hogan that he should extend the deadline? Is that now your position? Because I'm listening carefully to what you said. It's very coded language. You simply said there has been no change. You didn't say there would not be any change. You did not indicate what the nature of the conversation with Minister Hogan was. My party will be bringing forward legislation, very simple legislation, to amend the Act to extend the deadline to the end of September. Would you agree with that? Would you be prepared to support such a simple amendment to facilitate people? And I think basically, Taoiseach, can you explain what your position is now? Because I heard Minister Burton this morning saying that she felt there should be far easier ways of paying this than there has been to date.
Thank you.
You've acknowledged a change in relation to the post office now. So could you spell out to the Dáil what you said to Minister Hogan? You've coded language criticised the operation of this so far. Is it your view that an extension should happen and should be facilitated?
Thank you. Taoiseach.
Well, it's my normal practice at Ceann Comhairle before coming in to do leaders' questions and anticipating the kind of questions that I might be asked to is to check with the relevant minister as to what the up-to-date position is, and that's what I did with Minister Hogan. Yeah, but we do.
Chair, please. Thank you.
You know, this may be new to you, but this is a government in which ministers talk to each other. And can I remind you?
Thank you.
Can I?
Sorry.
No. Can I? I mean, you know, I want to give you. You know, I want to give you.
Please.
This is an issue. You know, this is an issue, Deputy Martin, that people are concerned about. People do want to pay what they need to pay, and they do need to have clarity on it, and that is why the government has been clear about this. The deadline is the 31st. The deadline is the 31st of March. The household charge does have to be paid by the 31st of March. I've acknowledged that there have been difficulties in relation to the method of payment. Now, if you insist, Deputy Martin, in making it a partisan issue, it's very simple. It's very simple. This is a charge that this government had to. This is a charge that this government had to introduce, because your government agreed with the Troika last year that there would be a property tax, that there would be a property tax introduced in 2012. It was not possible to introduce a property tax in 2012 because you have to make you have to do the preparatory work before a property tax can be introduced. And this charge was introduced as an interim measure. It's an interim measure pending the introduction of a property tax, which is being worked upon at the moment, and it does have to be paid. And people going around giving the impression that this doesn't have to be paid, and that if enough people don't pay it, it won't have to be paid. The reality is that this charge does have to be paid, and the deadline is the 31st of March.
Thank you. Deputy Mary Lou MacDonald.
And I'd like to join with others in paying tribute to the late Jim Stynes, a sporting hero, an Irish hero and a great Dubliner. And I'm sure that the thoughts and sympathy and solidarity of these houses are with his family at what has to be a very difficult time for them. Tánaiste that there's 10 days left and just over 80% of households have not paid the household charge. I think it's fair to say that your government's handling of this issue has been shambolic. I think it's also fair to say that your desperation is evident from the increasingly shrill tone of ministers trying to frighten citizens into paying this charge. I put it to you that you should stop trying to bully the electorate and try listening to them for a change. And the reality is that on this issue, just as with the DEIS schools, you have got it wrong. And you know, it's not simply a matter of the handling of the issue. What people do know is that the household charge is unfair and it's unjust, and that it should be withdrawn. The trade unions have been clear on this: SIP2, Unite, the CPSU, the Dublin Council of Trade Unions, all calling for this tax to be scrapped. So will you and the government now face facts? And tell me, do you really intend to bring hundreds of thousands of citizens before the courts on this issue, particularly when not a single banker has been jailed for causing the crisis that we're in? It's not a case of extending the deadline. It's not a controversy over whether or not the charge can be paid in a local post office. Will you accept, Tánaiste, that this unfair, unjust charge has failed and that it should be scrapped?
Thank you. Tánaiste.
No, the charge will not be scrapped. The charge will be replaced by a property tax, and the preparatory work for the introduction of a property tax is underway. And I look forward to hearing from you, Deputy, what are the Sinn Féin proposals in relation to a property tax. That would certainly be very helpful in the discussions that we're having. This government is not in the business of bullying anybody. But we do want to be straight with people, and I think that Deputy MacDonald, yourself, your party and others who are campaigning against this charge should also be straight with people. There is no point in misleading people into believing that the charge will not have to be paid, or that the charge will be wished away, or that it will be vanished in some kind of way. Households are required to pay the charge. There are penalties and interest charges, which are the normal type of penalties and interest charges that apply to unpaid taxes that will apply to this charge if it is not paid. And people who are advising, like your party, Deputy MacDonald, who are encouraging people not to pay it, are simply misleading people into a situation whereby they will be increasing household debt. That's not fair on the households concerned. By all means, it's fair enough for people to adopt a political position opposing the charge. That's fair enough, and oppose it here in the House and so on. But to go to the extent that you're going and that others are going to, which is encouraging people and advising people not to pay it, that's misleading people, and that's going to land people, households, in greater debt than they should be in.
Deputy MacDonald, please. Deputy MacDonald, please.
Tánaiste, far from misleading people on any of those matters, we've been very clear in saying that you do intend to levy this tax and that you will pursue people for fines and penalties. We also understand from you that you'll introduce amending legislation to coerce the public into payment of those penalties by attachment orders to their wages or their welfare payments. So the honest thing to say is this, Taoiseach, there are people out there who simply do not have the €100 to pay the charge. There are others out there who will not pay it because they view it, quite correctly, as a flat and unjust tax. It's also the honest thing to say, Taoiseach, that you stand over something that you know full well in your gut is unfair. It has been shambolically delivered. People have responded accordingly, and it strikes me that the sensible and the equitable thing to do at this juncture is to admit your mistake, as you have done before, and to withdraw this charge and the threats that you will pursue people, whether through the courts or whether via attachment orders. That would be the stuff of honesty, Taoiseach.
Thank you. Taoiseach.
Well, Deputy MacDonald, you have a hard neck because the equivalent charge in Northern Ireland is 10 to 15 times what this charge is. The household charge in the city of Derry, Deputy MacDonald, is €1,500. Now, you explain to me how you think it is okay for in one part of the island, which is governed and administered by your party, that households pay €1,500, and directly across the border in Donegal, of course, yes. Of course.
Sorry, please. Thank you, Thank you,
That is for sure. They are not comparable. There is no comparison between €1,500 of a charge in Derry and €100 of a charge in Donegal. And it's the height of hypocrisy for you to come in here and to go on with all of this hyperbole about hundreds of thousands of people being taken to court and people being coerced and so on. Nobody. There aren't going to be hundreds of thousands of people taken to court, and everybody knows that. There is a situation where the charge is not paid by the deadline. There will be an incurring of the fee, penalty fee, and there will be an incurring of interest rate, as is normal with unpaid tax. And your party should not be going around. Your party should not be going around encouraging people not to pay, which is simply going to put them in a situation that they're going to be incurring penalties, and they're going to be incurring additional interest.
Thank you, Taoiseach. Deputy Finian McGrath, please. Thank you.
Cancora, can I first of all join with my colleagues in offering my deepest sympathy on behalf of the technical group to the family of the late Jim Stynes. Particularly, Jim was a great sports person for Ballyboden, Dublin, Melbourne, and also a great sports ambassador for Ireland. Today, Cancora, I'd like to raise the very hugely important issue of the child sexual abuse report that came out yesterday. Can I say, first of all, that I welcome the fact that the Vatican has admitted the great shame over sex abuse in Ireland, and I welcome the apology. But I have to say, Taoiseach, that they are still not accepting the reality of past cover-ups of sexual abuse of children. They have to face that reality. There is also a common misapprehension that victims have been well looked after by the Church. The Church's legal teams are fighting tooth and nail to limit their financial exposure, and it's the victims, Taoiseach, that are suffering again. So I ask you today, is this true remorse? And does the Church need to address this particular issue? And can I ask you to respond to this? Can I also say, in relation to the guidelines, Taoiseach, I welcome the improvements in good practice, but at the same time, it's important, let's not delude ourselves, that there is some little boy or girl out there still suffering today as I speak from child sexual abuse. We've had a lot of reports, we've had a lot of recommendations, and the reality now is that we need to take action. So, Taoiseach, I ask you, what action will you be taking? Can I also ask you, what is your position and reaction to this report, particularly the silence and the cover-up aspects to child sexual abuse? Do you accept that there are a lot of good priests and nuns and lay people in the churches. They're absolutely shocked by the actions of senior people in their church, and they too have felt let down. Do you accept, Taoiseach, that the state too has a serious responsibility on this matter? And finally, Taoiseach, would you agree with Minister Frances Fitzgerald's comments today when she said that the state too had failed these children, and what are you going to do about that?
Taoiseach.
Well, the report which was issued yesterday was a report which was produced by the Vatican following the visitations which they had with the Irish Church and Irish seminaries. It is essentially a report by the church authorities on the church itself, and therefore I don't think it is really a matter for government to have a view on, insofar as the report itself is about internal church matters. I want to be clear, however, on one thing. The sexual abuse of children, the rape of children, is a crime. It is not a matter of theology, and it is not a matter which is exclusively in the domain of a church. And that is why this government has been absolutely clear, and that is on this issue, and that is why in our statement in September we made very clear that crimes which are committed and have been committed against children are matters that should have been reported to the Gardaí and the authorities, that those who sought to obstruct such reportage were seriously wrong. I think that, and I hope, arising from the report that was issued yesterday and other statements that has been made, that there will never be a question in the future of crimes of the kind that we have seen, which have been reported on in the Cloyne report and elsewhere, not being reported to the Gardaí and the authorities. As far as the government is concerned, we are proceeding with the Children First guidelines, with the measures that have been announced by Minister Fitzgerald, and later this year with a referendum on children's rights.
I want to thank the Taoiseach's response, and also that I welcome his comments in relation to this issue of being a crime against children. Can I ask you as well, Taoiseach, in relation to this particular report, that following this report that we in the state have to improve the child protection measures that are presented in this 7.5-page report? Secondly, do you accept that this is about the victims and their families? And do you accept that they need genuine support, compassion and practical support from the state? But can I also ask you, Taoiseach, and this is in relation to the broader issue of child sexual abuse, how do you plan to deal with the huge sexual abuse cases that are happening in the broader society? Some would say in the region of 90% of all child abuse, sexual abuse, happen in families, among relations, among neighbours and in the wider community. And how is your government going to help and protect these children from these kinds of abuses? Also, Taoiseach, can I ask you, will the children's rights referendum deal comprehensively with children at risk in the family environment? And that's a crucial aspect of 90% of child abuse cases. Can I also ask you, Taoiseach, there is an untold story in this debate, and that is the sexual abuse of children with an intellectual disability. And I ask you today, will you be a voice for those particular children? And finally, Cancora, can I ask the Taoiseach, in relation to the broader issue, when you say this report has nothing to do with him really, but can I ask you not to dismantle child protection services in the name of austerity in the current economic climate?
Thank you. Taoiseach.
Well, Deputy McGrath asks a series of questions which are basically about how the government is dealing with the issue of protection of children and services for children. And can I say that this government established a new department of children and youth affairs, appointed a cabinet minister to oversee the issue of protection of children and the delivery of services to children and the delivery of youth services. Minister Fitzgerald has announced the legislation government legislation in relation to the withholding of information. Described earlier the kind of crimes that have been committed against children. Minister Shatter has also brought forward legislation. There's the Child and Family Support Agency. There are supports being provided for families. And I think it's important to say that in relation to the protection of children, that support for families is something that I think is very important and has been a priority of Minister Fitzgerald's. There's a very strong emphasis on the inspection and a new inspection regime in relation to the provision of services and supports for children. So, in summary, this government gives a top priority to the protection of children, to the provision of support for children, and that, in the course of time, will be reflected in the referendum on children's rights, which is being progressed by Minister Fitzgerald.